For decades, the shadows of the Second World War have held a singular, almost unbelievable secret, a whisper passed down through veterans' gatherings and the deepest, most forgotten military archives. It is the story of a ghost army, a spectral host of soldiers who, by all accounts, never officially appeared in any record, never fired a shot in anger, and yet played a decisive, life-saving role in the largest and most lethal conflict the world has ever known. In the years immediately following 1945, and stretching deep into the Cold War era, any mention of this phantom force was met with bureaucratic denial. Some dismissed the tale as the hazy folklore of a generation that saw too much and endured too much, a wartime myth spun from the exhaustion of campaigning and the endless, corrosive necessity of operational secrecy. How could an entire army, the equivalent of multiple divisions, complete with tanks, trucks, artillery, and personnel numbering in the tens of thousands, simply vanish from official history? The notion defied logic, contradicted every known logistical analysis of the war effort, and yet, the persistent rumors clung like mist to the battlefields of Europe. Veterans spoke in hushed tones of units that disappeared overnight, only to be replaced by others that looked identical but felt wrong. But behind the official silence, behind the decades of classification stamps and formal denials that labeled the truth as top secret, lies a real, tangible, and utterly extraordinary story. It is the history of a deception operation so bold, so audacious, and executed with such imaginative brilliance that it remained locked away, hidden from public scrutiny and even from most military historians, for more than 50 years. This was not an army of flesh and blood, but an army of the mind, a strategic force wielded not by grizzled commanders, but by illusionists, abstract artists, and stage actors, a unique military formation designed not to conquer territory, but to fool the keenest enemy intelligence, to win the war by the deliberate, choreographed art of the lie. To understand the sheer necessity and magnitude of this deception, we must first recall the suffocating atmosphere of late 1943. The Allies were girding themselves for the ultimate gamble, the invasion of Fortress Europe. The plan, Operation Overlord, the D-Day landing, was a monumental undertaking, an enterprise requiring the concentration of every available soldier, every tank, every ship, and every ounce of moral courage. The logistical demands were staggering. But for every concentration of real power, there must be an effective distraction elsewhere. The German High Command, still a formidable and ruthless opponent despite years of attrition, knew with absolute certainty that an invasion was coming. Their intelligence officers, seasoned, diligent, and ruthlessly efficient, were tasked with one critical, war-defining goal, pinpointing the exact landing site. If the German reserves were committed prematurely, or committed to the wrong location, the invasion would fail, and the war could be prolonged indefinitely. The fate of the war, and crucially, the lives of countless young men poised to storm the beaches, depended not just on the strength of the landing force, but on the ability of the Allies to convince the enemy, through every available channel of intelligence, that the attack would come somewhere else. In the war of steel and fire, of bomb and bullet, the critical battleground shifted unexpectedly to the realm of human perception and psychological manipulation. It was here, in the cold, calculated calculus of military misdirection, that the need for a non-existent army was formalized. The Ghost Army was not an accidental byproduct of wartime confusion, it was a deliberate, meticulously crafted illusion, born from the desperate, strategic necessity to draw the enemy's gaze away from the true prize. It became a story of genius disguised as non-existence, a victory achieved by the subtle, decisive art of not being there. The idea for such a phantom force, one composed more of stage props than actual ordnance, was not conceived in a sterile war room filled with stiffly uniformed generals, but in the creative void created by the sheer, overwhelming chaos of a world war in which traditional tactics were constantly being outpaced by modern necessity. The critical period was the winter and spring of 1944. The American Expeditionary Force was gathering overwhelming strength in the United Kingdom, preparing for the colossal leap across the English Channel. Every southern English harbor was clogged with materiel, every coastal town buzzed with infantry training exercises. Yet, even with the vast industrial and human resources of the United States and Great Britain marshaled, a grim reality permeated the High Command. They simply did not have enough real soldiers to defend every potential front, to threaten every possible invasion site simultaneously, or to fully cover the flanks of their primary thrust into Normandy. The Germans, guided by brilliant strategic minds like Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, possessed an uncanny ability to rapidly reinforce their defenses wherever they detected a serious buildup of Allied strength. Every German panzer division held in reserve was a potential disaster for the fragile landing beaches. The key to Overlord's success, and to countless operations that would follow across the continent, was not just hitting the enemy hard, but hitting them where they least expected it, or, more accurately, convincing them to wastefully commit their crucial reserves to a massive threat that was never intended to materialize. The concept of military deception, or ruse de guerre, was as old as warfare itself, tracing back to Sun Tzu. But this task required something on an unprecedented scale: the creation of an entire, operational army formation from thin air. Instead of creating a new, costly, and time-consuming real army, General Dwight D. Eisenhower's planners made a chillingly pragmatic and brilliantly simple decision. They would create a unit whose sole purpose was to pretend one existed. This goal demanded a complete inversion of military thinking. This was emphatically not a job for conventional infantry or artillery officers, men trained in the rigid, uncompromising application of overwhelming force. The plan required a profoundly different kind of soldier, a specialist in the delicate art of human perception, a master of illusion and psychological manipulation. It required artists, industrial designers, sound engineers, professional actors, set designers, and theatrical illusionists, people who knew intrinsically more about creativity, stagecraft, and the visual manipulation of perspective than they did about conventional combat. The initial concept was both audacious and simple: a highly mobile, incredibly small in number unit that could rapidly assume the identity and scale of a much larger, operational fighting force, a corps or an armored division of 30,000 men. The unit, officially designated the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a deliberately vague, forgettable, and bureaucratically flat title, was swiftly brought to life. Its creation was overseen by Colonel Harry L. Reeder, a seasoned combat engineer, and later shaped by figures like Colonel Clifford R. Stanley. But the true spirit of the 23rd came from its extraordinary, almost unbelievable roster of recruits. They were sourced primarily from art schools, advertising agencies, theatrical troupes, and design studios, men whose hands were accustomed to paintbrushes, drafting tools, spotlights, and sculpting clay, not M1 Garand's or field maps. Many had been drafted into the mundane, easily overlooked roles of supply clerks, cooks, or mechanics, their invaluable artistic and creative talents seen as entirely secondary to the wartime machine. But the architects of the 23rd saw their true value. They were the masters of representation and fabrication. They were experts in taking a blank canvas, a field, a forest, a stretch of empty road, and creating a believable, operational reality. The final roster was a remarkable, star-studded collection of talent. Among them were future giants of American culture, fashion designers like Bill Blass, abstract sculptors like Ellsworth Kelly, and renowned painters and illustrators like Arthur Singer. They were the perfect cast for this surreal military drama. Their mission was not to shed blood, but to manipulate the enemy's intelligence and blood pressure, not to destroy the enemy's defenses, but to create an environment of strategic confusion. They would manufacture a false reality on a grand, operational scale, utilizing the 4 key pillars of deception that defined their unique art of war. Visual deception: the creation and deployment of thousands of inflatable, rubberized, full-scale dummies of tanks, artillery pieces, trucks, and jeeps. Sonic deception: the broadcasting of realistic, pre-recorded soundscapes, the crushing metallic roar of a large military unit on the march. Radio deception: spoof radio, the meticulous, high-volume simulation of a massive, complex radio network, the definitive technical indicator to German intelligence of a major unit's presence. Theatrical deception: acoustics and atmosphere, the men themselves, tasked with the constant, dangerous art of impersonating the soldiers of the real divisions they were replacing or simulating. This was not merely camouflage or simple cover. It was high-stakes performance art, a psychological warfare symphony played out on the plains and dusty roads of Europe. The stakes were impossibly high and universally understood. If the German intelligence realized that the armored division moving into position was composed of nothing but painted rubber and a few hundred theatrical actors, the real Allied forces would be strategically exposed, and the entire war effort could be fatally compromised. The men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the Ghost Army, were given their single, absolute charge: deceive, misdirect, and survive. Their intensive training in the spring of 1944 was a blur of conventional infantry drills mixed with utterly unconventional instruction. How to inflate a 20-ton Sherman tank in minutes using a portable compressor, how to make a Jeep's simple radio antenna appear to be a company command post network, and most importantly, how to expertly act the part of tough, battle-ready GIs, even when their most potent weapon was a coil of rubber and an air pump. They were about to debut in the greatest, most consequential show on Earth, a silent war of wits that would decisively shape the outcome of D-Day and the subsequent liberation of the continent. Their stage would be the unassuming fields of France, their audience the suspicious German high command, and their success would ultimately be measured in the terrifying absence of a battle that the enemy was utterly convinced was about to happen. The soldiers of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were, by definition, unlike any fighting force created before or since. They did not fight with M-1 Garand, machine guns, or heavy artillery pieces. Their weapons were purely tools of perception, instruments of misdirection, and canvas and rubber mockeries of true combat hardware. If a conventional army's success was measured in ground gained and enemies defeated, the Ghost Army's victory was uniquely measured in the believability of a lie and the resulting, crucial number of German troops held stationary, miles and days away from the real action. Their arsenal was divided into three core components, each a collaborative masterpiece of practical illusion designed to fool the three primary sensory inputs utilized by sophisticated German intelligence gathering: sight, aerial reconnaissance, sound, acoustic monitoring, and radio traffic direction finding. The visual deception, the rubber menagerie. The most striking and operationally critical tool of the 23rd was the inflatable vehicle. Imagine the scene: a team of men arriving in a vast, empty field, not with cranes and steel movers, but with canvas duffel bags and small, whirring air pumps. From these seemingly innocuous, lightweight bundles, they could rapidly conjure the imposing shadow and scale of a massive armored division. Crucially, these were not crude children's toys, they were meticulously crafted, industrial-grade props, engineered by the pioneers of modern rubber technology. Their inventory included the 5-ton profile of a Sherman tank, which weighed barely 90 pounds when deflated, allowing just 2 men to carry and deploy them easily. There were also inflatable jeeps, troop transport trucks, menacing half-tracks, and even enormous 155mm howitzer cannons, all full-size. They were constructed of durable, rubberized silk fabric, supported by a thin internal aluminum or wooden frame, and painted with painstaking, matte attention to detail, matching the dull, anti-reflective olive drab of authentic U.S. equipment. The logistics of rapid inflation, realistic deployment, and high-speed deflation were themselves a highly refined and essential art form. A small team could deploy a full tank company, a terrifying concentration of theoretical steel, in a matter of hours, only to vanish into the night. The visual deception was maximized at night. German reconnaissance aircraft and forward scouts relied heavily on silhouettes, shadow, and basic vehicle counting. Under the forgiving veil of moonlight, or the heavy gloom of a combat blackout, the difference between a real Sherman tank's menacing, 30-ton profile and its 90-pound rubber counterpart was absolutely indiscernible from 500 feet, let alone from a high-flying Luftwaffe spotter plane tasked with thermal or silhouette imaging. The artists of the 23rd became rapid deployment set designers on a massive, deadly stage. They didn't just inflate the vehicles, they posed them. Tanks were positioned with appropriate, militarily accurate spacing, aligned as if ready for a sudden, aggressive push. They ensured discipline in the lie. For added realism, they carried real tank tracks, which were used to stamp convincing, heavy tank treads into the soft earth leading right up to the fake positions, adding the necessary realism that only heavy machinery could leave behind. They added details that would convince a sneaky scout. Mess kits were left carelessly nearby, fake latrine pits were dug, and the ground was churned. The stagecraft extended to every last detail, ensuring that any German scout who sneaked close enough, or any high-resolution reconnaissance photo taken from above, would confirm the presence of a vast, operational, and immediately threatening armored force. But the crucial detail that guaranteed the deception's success was that the force was never static. The Ghost Army's mantra was movement. The same 90-pound tank that sat menacingly in Field A on Monday night would be deflated, loaded onto a 2.5-ton truck, and rapidly re-inflated and repositioned in Field B 10 miles away by Tuesday morning. This rapid, deceptive repositioning amplified the unit's apparent size. A physical force of fewer than 1,100 men, through disciplined, repeated, and clearly visible movements, could convincingly impersonate a 30,000-man division ready for war. The sonic deception, the voice of thunder. German intelligence also relied heavily on sound, the deep, unmistakable clamor of a large army mobilizing. The metallic screech of hundreds of tank treads on asphalt, the low, powerful rumble of hundreds of supply trucks in convoy, the shouted commands and the general noise of men. These distinct sounds betrayed unit size, type, and readiness. The absence of such noise was often as telling as its presence. To replicate this massive auditory signature, the 23rd included the 3132 Signal Service Company, a highly specialized group of sound engineers, audio technicians, and electronics experts. Their weapon was the sonic deception apparatus. Enormous, custom-built sound systems mounted on highly mobile half-tracks and powerful enough to blast complex, realistic soundscapes across miles of territory. These were not standard field radios or phonographs. These were highly sophisticated, high-fidelity recordings, mastered and edited at the Army's specialized sound labs. They captured every crucial, verifiable sound, from the idling purr of a 2.5-ton truck to the complex, metallic cacophony of an entire tank column grinding to a halt and starting up again. These sounds were meticulously engineered not just for volume, but for operational realism. The engineers understood acoustics and topography. Sounds needed to be played at varying volumes, with realistic Doppler shifts, and overlaid with appropriate background noise, distant bird calls, the faint murmur of human activity, to convince a distant German listening post that they were hearing a real, organic, and vulnerable movement. The sonic teams operated primarily under the essential cover of darkness. They would set up their massive, specialized loudspeakers, strategically pointing them toward known enemy lines and observation posts, and unleash a terrifying soundscape. One night, it would be the dull thud and metallic clank of heavy artillery being moved into forward position. The next, it would be the sudden, overwhelming roar of 1,000 engines starting up simultaneously, suggesting a massive offensive was imminent. Enemy scouts and acoustic listening posts, already primed by the sight of the inflatable decoys, would report back on the sound of entire divisions mobilizing. This was a crucial, necessary piece of the deception puzzle, designed to convince the Germans not just that troops were present, but that they were active, dangerous, and preparing for immediate attack. The echo of a fabricated army carried further and struck deeper fear than any artillery shell. The radio deception. Spoof radio. If sight and sound were the body and voice of the ghost army, the most critical piece of evidence for any modern intelligence unit was the traffic on the airwaves. Every large military formation, from a company to an army corps, maintains a constant, complex chatter of coded messages, maintenance requests, status reports, and command directives. This dense, rhythmic, and unique flow of communications is famously known as the unit's radio signature. The German Funkhorchdienst radio listening service was expert at monitoring, analyzing, and triangulating these signals to pinpoint exactly which unit, and precisely how large it was located where. The Ghost Army's answer was the 3138 Signal Service Company, the elite, spoof radio operators. These were men, often chosen for their wit and mental agility, who could precisely mimic the style, the tone, and even the unique, subtle, fists, the individual mannerisms and timing of a Morse code operator of the real units they were pretending to be. They mastered the authentic codes, the authentic call signs, and the authentic bureaucratic rhythms of a specific American division, say, the seasoned 6th Armored Division or the newly arrived 17th Airborne. They would generate an enormous volume of carefully composed, believable, and seemingly vital radio chatter. The messages were complex and seemingly genuine. A request for 40 gallons of high-octane fuel, a complaint about a faulty track on a Sherman, a highly coded conversation about rendezvous points that only served to confuse German codebreakers further. Crucially, the operators had to be precise about volume and spread. A real division's radio network covers a large, 30-mile area. The spoof operators had to transmit from geographically disparate points, rapidly moving their mobile transmitters to convince German radio direction finders (RDF) that the signal was emanating from a 30-mile front, not a handful of scattered trucks. They would deliberately send messages that were slightly too strong or slightly too weak for the German receivers, forcing the enemy to dedicate more time, more men, and more resources to locating this massive, phantom formation. If the inflatable tanks were the body and the sound trucks the voice, the radio signals were the indispensable heartbeat of the Ghost Army. They provided the constant, invisible, and technically verifiable confirmation that the enemy's visual and acoustic perceptions were indeed correct. The combined, synchronized effect was overwhelming. Germans saw massive forces, heard massive forces, and received constant technical radio proof of their operational existence. In this extraordinary, high-stakes war of stagecraft, the soldiers of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were not merely technicians operating specialized equipment. They were first and foremost actors on the most dangerous stage in the world. They were the masters of theatrical deception, trained to become the flesh and blood embodiment of the strategic lie they were perpetrating. Their ability to adopt and instantly discard identities, moving seamlessly from one persona to the next, was the final, critical, and often most hazardous layer of the illusion. This was where their deep professional backgrounds in theater, costume design, commercial art, and storytelling became profoundly invaluable to the war effort. One day, an artist might don the helmet and patch of a combat engineer, convincingly setting up the appearance of a heavy river crossing operation. The next, they would be wearing the Red Cross armbands of a field medic unit, establishing a triage center conspicuously near a crucial road junction. And by the third day, they would transform into the swaggering confidence and casual professionalism of a veteran armored battalion, casually mingling in local French towns, drinking in cafes, and telling credible, albeit subtly misleading, stories of their imminent deployment to the front lines. Their mission, constantly reiterated by their commanders, was not to destroy, but to mislead, to sow deep confusion in the minds of German commanders and, in doing so, save real soldiers from deadly, unnecessary confrontations. They understood implicitly that intelligence isn't just gathered from the air or over the radio, it's gathered from the ground, through spies, double agents, and the simple, unguarded chatter of local civilians who might chatter innocently to German officers, forging the identity and atmosphere. To make the illusion completely foolproof, the Ghost Army had to do far more than just wear the right uniform patch. They had to forge the entire atmosphere and cultural identity of a real unit. This involved meticulous, painstaking attention to detail, insignia painting and maintenance. They carried massive stencils, brushes, and fresh paint, constantly updating their real vehicles and the inflatable ones with the correct, authentic division and unit markings as they moved, ensuring the outward appearance of the unit was always evolving and matched the movements of the real unit they were impersonating. Documentation forgery. They became adept at producing fake passes, movement orders, and duty rosters that, if captured by the enemy, would provide seemingly ironclad, corroborating proof of a major unit's deployment schedule and imminent intentions. Creating atmosphere and behavior. When interacting with civilians, or critically, the occasional Allied military police or liaison officers who weren't in on the secret, the men had to expertly act the part. They learned the specific slang, the unit jokes, the complex command structure, and the subtle, behavioral telltales associated with the unit they were impersonating. If they were posing as the battle-hardened, weary 9th Infantry Division, they needed to project a cynical, experienced professionalism. If they were the fresh-faced, energetic 17th Airborne, they needed to look disciplined, ready, and slightly overconfident. This level of detail made their cover seamless. This was the highest form of disciplined, high-stakes improvisation. They were constantly shifting identities, appearing and disappearing in various guises along the front line, always ensuring that the German command received a constant, low-frequency, yet persistent stream of misinformation that supported and validated the massive visual and sonic deception happening simultaneously. The risk of exposure and the cost of the lie. The theatrical deception was also, ironically, the most physically dangerous element of their operation. Unlike the sound engineers or radio operators who could often work safely behind the front lines, the visual and theatrical teams often had to operate within the direct sight of the enemy. They were deliberately positioned close to known German observation posts and near roads frequented by German spies or forward scouts. Their goal was to be seen and believed. The danger was constant and lethal. If a German patrol managed to sneak into their sector and realized the imposing M4 Sherman tank was a simple $400 rubber balloon, and the veteran division was a troupe of painters and actors, the entire, critical operation would be compromised. The men of the 23rd were lightly armed. Their primary defense strategy was not based on firepower, but on instantly and absolutely maintaining the illusion at all costs. They were constantly reminded by their commanders that the survival of the real units, who were fighting the real war elsewhere, depended entirely on the quality and integrity of their performance. Their success was measured in the deployment of real enemy troops. Every German reconnaissance flight diverted to track the fake 10th Armored Division near Metz, France, was a success. Every panzer company held needlessly in reserve because German high command believed the 4th Armored was preparing a breakthrough at a false location was a victory for the Ghost Army. They never took a hill, but they ensured that real American divisions could take theirs with drastically fewer casualties. They were the unsung heroes of misdirection, a unique brotherhood of artists and performers who went to war armed with rubber, records, and remarkable audacity. They saved lives not by killing, but by convincing the enemy to look the wrong way. And as D-Day rapidly approached, their performance was about to be called upon for the grandest, most history-altering deception of the entire war, Operation Fortitude.